So I'm at the point in my side table project where I need to attach the stretcher, represented by this piece of scrap wood, to the leg, represented by this piece of scrap wood. And I want to do that using a sliding dovetail, so the stretcher will slide into the center of the leg. So my setup here on my router table is I have a dovetail bit set up, and I'm using these Craig feather boards. The nice thing about them is they can act as a stop and simply as a holding piece. Of course, if I use a feather board in this setup, I need to come in and then I have to pull the part back out because I'm not going all the way through. This is a stopped dovetail. If I use a feather board, of course I'm going to be able to go in, but it's going to lock and I won't be able to come back out. So simply flipping the board around and using it as a holding stop works quite well. I'm going to put a dovetail down the center of the board, and then I'm going to adjust it so I can get it to the exact width that I want. But I want to take the material out running down the center first before I start to get it to the exact size. Now I want to stop this dovetail 1 3/4 inches, which is the width of my stretcher. So it'll slide in, and when it's done there won't be any of that jointery showing below the stretcher. So my setup is set to do that. I'm going to do a practice cut, make sure that I'm close. I'm going to put on my eye protection and hearing protection, and we'll make that cut. And as you can see, I have a sliding dovetail that's the exact width of the board that I need. So now I can do the exact same cuts on all the other pieces that I need to do. So I'm just about ready to do the first pass of cutting these sliding dovetails in my legs. And as you can see, I'm using spalted maple. And so there's a few things that's important to remember with this. One is that I'm going for a particular look where I really want certain sides out. So it's really important to keep track of the top and the outside, because you can see this board is very different from one side to the other, and I'm going for this very spalted look. The other thing is, I'm making this pass, is really important to make sure that this piece doesn't float up off the table, because that will change the geometry of that joint. So it's important that I keep it pushed down as I route in and out. And that's part of the reason why I like to do just cleaning out the center first, because it gives me an opportunity to do the final passes, taking out less material, and therefore having a lot more control over the piece. So again, put on my protective equipment, and we're going to make these cuts. So the next step in this process is to get the dovetail to the width that I need. What I want is I want this dimension from there to there to be 5/8 of an inch. Right now it's at 1/2 inch because that's the size of dovetail bit that I'm using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the fence in slightly, about 1/16 of an inch. That will get it moved over here, and then I'll move it away, and I can get the other side to get my full 5/8 wide that I'm going for. Of course, I'm going to do a test cut with my test board to make sure that I'm getting close to that dimension that I want. So a quick check with the ruler will show that what was 1/2 inch is now 9/16 of an inch. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to size the stretcher, the dovetail in it, to slide in perfectly. So this just needs to be something close to 5/8 of an inch, and will make the perfect fit on the other half. So now I can go through and do the exact same cut on the 4 legs that I'm using. So the next step is to actually move the fence 1/8 of an inch away from where it is right now. So 1/16 of an inch from where it was initially. That way we'll be able to move over and cut this part of it. And it's the same stop, everything else is the same. It's just simply the position of the fence that will do that. So I've done 2 test cuts And I know how that dimension is exactly 5/8 of an inch, which is what I wanted. So now I got to go through and do that final pass on the 4 legs as well. So as you can see on one of my finished legs, I have a dovetail that's 5/8 of an inch wide, and it stopped 1 inch and 3/4 the way down the board. So the next step in the process is to make the matching corresponding dovetail in the stretcher itself. So we can use some math to help us set up our router table to cut this dovetail. We know that this board is 3/4 of an inch thick, and we know from measuring that the opening of this dovetail is 7/16 of an inch. So that means that this dimension here needs to be 7/16. Doing math, it says that each shoulder is now 5/32 of an inch wide. We have a router bit in here that if we set up on the center line of it, that the leading edge of the cutter will be 1/4 inch away from the fence because it's a 1/2 inch diameter router bit. And we want it to be 5/32 of an inch. So what we're going to do is we simply have to move the fence towards the front of the table, thereby reducing the amount of material that the router bit will cut until we're down to that 5/32. So we know it's 1/4 inch, which is 8/32. So when we move it in 3/32, that will leave us with our 5/32. We want to move it a little bit more than that because we want to sneak up on this fit. So the more we move this fence forward, the wider this is going to be, which means it will be a tight fit. So I suggest moving it in 4/32 or 1/8 of an inch, and then we can work our way back to make the perfect fit. So we're going to move that fence over 4/32 and lock it down. And we're going to make a cut using some scrap pieces. So I've made a pass on either side. You can see that I've used a push block to help guide the piece through. It makes things a lot safer and a lot easier to push that part through, because trying to push this flimsy piece is a lot easier when you're using your hand back here safely away from the router bit, trying to push that through. So we made our pass, setting our fence to 4/32, and it doesn't fit, and we knew it wouldn't. So now I've moved the fence back closer to 3/32, and I'm going to take off material on either side of this to try to bring it to a nice tight fit. So after a handful of small adjustments, I now have a joint that fits perfectly. And a couple things to note here. One, your scrap stretcher must be the exact same thickness as the actual one that you're using, or else your adjustments aren't going to actually work for you. Another thing to note, that if for some reason in your adjustment, if this slides in and there's a gap between the face of this leg and the shoulder of that dovetail, you can take that out by simply lowering your router bit a very small amount, of 1/64 or 1/32. It'll tighten up that gap, but be aware that that could throw off other things. So you want to make sure you do that before you start making all the adjustments. Again, just to making sure you do lots of practice pieces, and don't just check it in your scrap piece. Make sure you're actually checking it in a finished leg, because the fit might be slightly different. In my case, it's actually slightly tighter in the finished leg. But again, this gives you some opportunity to sneak up on the fit. If you do it correctly, you shouldn't be able to go past it because of the nature of the setup. You can't take off too much material by accident, and you can just work your way until you have the perfect fit. And it'll slide in nicely, and it'll be a nice, tight, solid joint. So I've made all my adjustments. I have my actual stretcher. And now I'm going to go through and make the passes and put the dovetail on the end of these pieces. If I grab a leg, I have a nice tight fit. So one of my 4 dovetails didn't fit perfectly. The 3 fit in nicely. So I'm simply going to put this piece that doesn't fit in a vise, take a nice sharp chisel, and I'm just going to clean off a tiny amount from both sides, because it's just a little tiny bit tight, so I don't need to take off very much material. So just those 2 quick little passes with the chisel have made this piece so they slides very nicely together now. So what you do see with this now is, since this is a stop dovetail and there's a radius in there from the router bit, this doesn't slide down all the way. As you can see, it sits proud of it. So what we need to do is we need to work on this end of it to make it radius to match up with that. So I've already made the adjustments to this, and if you can see the end that I just put a radius around it. And now that if I take it and insert it into this sliding dovetail, it's perfectly smooth across the end. Now I'm going to walk through the steps to do this, and it's really quite simple. So you need to take the leg that is matched to the dovetail you're working with, and we just have to put that radius in it. So I'm going to set this in my vise, take a nice sharp chisel. I'm going to start by simply marking these edges. And then I'm going to come in from the end, and just with some light taps, I'm going to be able to remove the bulk of that material. This process needs a little bit of patience. You're just going to move material, you're going to test the fit, and then tweak it. So it's just continually moving some material, and then we're going to slide this joint together. You're going to see where we're getting, make sure it's nice and tight, and actually we're pretty close right there. So it doesn't take much. Quick work with the chisel, and now that's a nice smooth flush top to it.